for all the house there is there, it's not that big, you know, really. Ceilings are too high, and a lot of things wrong with it. We've looked at it and decided we just live with it the way it is. Just kind of keep it fixed up.
Yeah.
But I better go home and run my chickens in.
Yeah. Don't want the coyotes getting into them. Yeah. Just when you think you got something going, a curveball your way.
Yeah. That's part of life, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. You said earlier your dad was an orphan?
Well, his mother died when he was 12.
Do you know how she died?
No, I don't. Women just died back in those days, it seemed like.
Yeah.
They didn't live as long. And Uncle Norman was 6, I think, when she died. About that time, anyway,
Where were they living about then?
in Kansas City.
Okay. Then it was that big, what was it, the crash in 93 or 94?
Yeah, the Panic of '93, I think.
That drove him into bankruptcy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he got in debt too much on that new house. And he couldn't make the payments. He lost it.
So they were building a house in Kansas City.
Yeah.
And he was, your dad's dad was a tailor.
Yeah.
Down there. And then they came west.
Yeah. Heading for California, I guess, on the gold rush.
Yeah. And I guess they somehow got on the Green River.
Yeah. They met some people down here in Grand Junction, I think, going on that float trip, a raft trip down the Green River. And I don't know how many days they were on it, but anyway, they shipwrecked, and Grandpa decided he didn't want to go on with those boys, I guess, and he came back to Grand Junction. And somebody told him how good the fishing was up here around the Vega. So he come up here and stayed till 1902, I guess.
Well, this was your dad that came up here because of the fishing, or was it because of your grandpa?
My grandpa.
Okay. Now, when did your dad and come back this way then with your grandpa? After the boat capsized, they all come up here together, or do you know?
Yeah. They all came up here together after they got back to Grand Junction.
Yeah. Huh. I wonder how far downriver they got before that boat capsized.
I don't know. I wish I'd have paid more attention.
Yeah.
Back in those days.
And then your dad got wind of the logging industry up in northern Idaho, somewhere in there.
Well, I don't know whether that's what sent him away or not, because he spent the first winter at Meridian, Idaho, working on that New York Canal with his team and scraper. And old Grandpa Hill, he was just a fish out of water. Dad had to take care of him all his life after Dad was old enough to. It must have been awful hard on Mom to have him in the little bitty houses they had to live in, you know. She was a saint.
Well, I suppose your grandpa, came out of New York State originally, right?
Yeah.
So I suppose this western frontier was quite a different world for him.
Yeah. And he had one brother, I think his name Aaron Hill, that came west I don't know how many years before he did, but they never heard any more from him.
Your dad's name was what?
William Peter.
William Peter. You got his name, middle name, I guess. So then your dad went to Winchester, got up in that country.
Yeah.
What about 1903, 1904, right around then?
Well, it must have been probably 1903, but I wouldn't, wish I'd have paid more attention then.
Yeah.
I think they just spent that one winter
In Meridian.
and part of the summer in Meridian. And then, I don't know, somebody told him about the elk hunting up there in the Clearwater, on the other side of Lewiston on the Clearwater River. And they went up there then. I don't know whether they ever went elk hunting or not. But that's when he got to hauling grain and hauling lumber. They didn't have that big sawmill then, They just had just a lot of little sawmills around that country. And he would haul lumber down to that place where Cousin Ida is, Lapaway.
Yeah.
And I think that the railroad is right close there. They'd take the lumber down there and they'd haul the grain down there too, so it could be hauled down to Lewiston and put on the barges to go to the Orient.
Your dad must have been quite an adventurer.
Yeah, he was. And he never got over it. He was that way all his life.
Wonder how he was able to finally just settle down here.
Well, I don't know. Every 2 or 3 years he'd have to go back out there and work on his houses or something. He had to. He had to go someplace.
Lay down. Well, how was he able to scrape the money together to buy that place up in Idaho, do you know?
Well, I'm not sure how he acquired it. I think he took over somebody else's homestead thing on it. It was just 80 acres, and I think it had quite a bit of timber on it then, and he sold the timber off to the lumber company after that big lumber company built a lake and put in that big mill there.
I wanted to make sure I got that story about how your dad met your mom with the lost horse.
His horses got away from him. And after you leave Winchester coming down that canyon, there's a road across there. And that was the way, or that road down the canyon wasn't there then. We went down on that high road from Winchester down to Cul-de-sac. But anyway, he was following those horses, or got wind of where they were anyway. Got over there to where Granddad Flat lived. Mom was, of course, living there. And he went in there to borrow a horse to get his horses rounded up. She wouldn't loan it to him. Boy, he was mad. And he never got over it, really.
It's amazing how we think how central horses were to your existence back then, and how they don't matter at all anymore, do they?
No. Oh, they were absolutely essential then. See, after that Craig Mountain Lumber Company came in there and put in that big sawmill, they put spur railroads all out through that timber everywhere, and haul those logs in on those freight trains. But when he first started out there, they just worked for those little sawmills. There was one right there between our house and the schoolhouse, right at the foot of that hill. I can remember that big sawdust pile there when I was a kid.
Hmm.
And they had quite a few of those little mills around, I guess.
What to do with all that sawdust, you know? Is that just wasted or?
Oh, I think it just rotted down.
Yeah.
And they just will do the same thing here. They won't even let them put a sawmill on the forest
Mm-hmm.
on account of that sawdust pile.
What do you remember most about growing up in Winchester?
Oh, I don't know. I used to go to my cousin's places for Sunday dinner every once in a while. That was kind of the highlights of it, I guess.
I think, you know, one of the things I seem to remember, you know, your mom was surrounded by her family, and there were a lot more aunts on that side, wasn't there? More women that were directly related.
Yeah, so she just had 2 brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest of them were sisters, I think. I'd have to look on that picture. I don't know how many. Seemed like there's 7 of them, maybe, or 8.
I suppose that was kind of a jolt leaving that for.
Maybe that's Joe. And then he'd line us up for height, you know, as school doings or anything. I was clear at the bottom and Rex was just ahead of me.
Old Rex was a good neighbor, wasn't he?
He sure was. Yeah, he was the best. And Dylan's all right too, but he just isn't on the ball like Rex was.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of letting the place go to pot.
Mm-hmm.
He don't take care of it at all. He's got that job with the gas company. He gets some money, I guess, and that's the main thing.
Yeah.
That's the trouble with all these ranches. A lot of these younger people could do it if they could get by the first 2 or 3 years, money-wise, but how to get by then. Just takes so much to keep them going.
Yeah, it takes a lot just to keep up a yard,
Mm-hmm.
let alone hundreds of acres and fences and.
All the fences, and you got to keep up dams in the ditches and dams in the creeks. And I look back, I don't know where I ever got the money or the will to get all the things done I did here with like especially these ditches. I only had 1 ditch that had a cement head gate in it. That was that number 5 ditch, and I helped build that when I was a kid. But since then, I've built them all. The one up here in the number 1, and that was the cedar ditch, and number 5 over here, and the highline ditch. And then we had that little Leon ditch, all the head gates and controls that they got on that. I don't know where I ever got the money to do it. Guess I just saved it.
How many miles of ditch do you think you've built in your life?
And that Leon ditch, of course, we'd had to have a dozer do it, but they had to, you know, have it done. And it's 5.5 miles long. We had to extend it 1 3/8 from where it used to be.
Did you do the surveying on it?
No, we had to. It was on the forest land, and we had to have a licensed surveyor do it. Government regulations.
Mm-hmm.
But then on all these other ditches I surveyed.
Yeah. Well, this Salt Creek ditch one above the big field, you surveyed all that out.
Well,
Did a lot of that by hand, didn't you?
there was quite a lot of that though, but I come around to that where the women had the place. That was an old ditch around there,
And where's that?
up on the hill, where those sisters has got the land up there, and next to our highline field.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But we had to rebuild that ditch too. We took it. It used to be only covered about half that much ground.
Mm-hmm.
We brought the water clear around in Platte Creek, around there. Shoveled that all by hand every spring.
Didn't you have a flue or something across there, across Salt Creek?
Yeah, flumed it across Salt Creek,
Mm-hmm.
and then had I don't know how many those old wooden flumes coming down this side of Salt Creek. That were just terrible. When you got all done, you couldn't get any water through it. Those old wooden flumes just settle a little and they run over them, and they'll settle some more. But then when you got out it and built that new one out of Salt Creek, well, that pretty well took care of it. But it wouldn't have done any good to build that one out of Salt Creek until they got the Leon ditch built. There wouldn't have been any water for it.
Yeah. You bought the Campbell place up there first. That was kind of your first piece of ground you ever owned, wasn't it?
Well, no, I didn't buy it until I bought this place. I bought the two of them together.
Okay.
That's all I wanted to buy, all I wanted to get in debt on. But Dad just insisted he wanted to get rid of this. And the best way to make me take it along with the other place.
Was he just wanting to retire then, or?
Yeah, he was. See, he was 32 years old when he got married. So see, he was 33 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So he was ready to retire.
And you lived up there on the Salt Creek place for how many years then?
12 years.
And then you moved down here when your folks moved to town?
Yeah, well, they moved up there in their old log cabin for a year or so, I guess. They wanted to see what it liked to live in the wilds, I guess. I don't know why they moved up there. Mostly because they wanted to keep that old sorrel horse, I think. So we had a place for him.
Well, when did you start thinking about adding to your place by buying that ground further up Salt Creek? Was that even conceivable when you were younger?
Well, I was getting back to my story again. I bought that part where the long field is, that sweet clover patch.
Mm-hmm.
I bought that before I bought any of this other stuff from Dad. 120 acres there. And that was about it then.
There were no fences, just a dirt road track going through there, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a fence on the lower side of the road on part of it. Where Donald Weber had that carpenter place, we call it.
Mm-hmm.
See, of course, that field was just all brush and gulches before I started clearing it up.
Mm-hmm. All those gullies had to be filled in.
Yeah, a lot of gulches. And the worst trouble was picking all those oak roots. God, that's a job. Those sticking up, they had to carry the axe along, chop them off, load them on a hay rack, take them down there to the lower side of the field along the creek and unload them, and go back and get another load.
How long did it take you to clear that field?
I cleared it in 3 different increments, 4 I guess, so it didn't take too long at a time. I never tried to do more than I could get some crop into, so it wouldn't grow up the brush again.
Yeah. Well, wasn't the main Salt Creek Road on the other side of the creek, though?
Yeah, but that was about the time we came to the country that they changed the road on that side.
Then when did you acquire the big field and all that country and the Walker mess? And
Well, when I bought the folks out.
okay, that was part of their place too.
Huh?
That was part of their place too.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I didn't know that.
No, it was under two different homesteads, but old Ivan Camel had both of them, and then when Dad bought them out, that took care of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
What?
he bought that whole thing for $3,600,
Wow.
and I bought that long field and that 120 acres for $54. Of course, it wasn't worth much then either. Wasn't any water.
Mm-hmm.
It was all done hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have anything else to do. It just well work.
That was kind of right in the middle of the Depression, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the Depression was getting over it somewhat then, but I forgot what year I did get that 120 acres there.
Well, did you have to borrow the money to get it, or did you have the cash yourself? Or
Well, it only took $52.
yeah,
Could make that.
I think $52 to buy a piece of ground about that big in Steamboat Springs now,
Yeah.
even in Oak Creek.
But, and then when I bought the folks out of it, we had quite a little money saved up then. Joe, she was a good manager. And I think we had about $7,000 saved up then that we paid down on this outfit at that time.
What did you pay for this then?
Huh?
What did you pay for it?
$25,000.
$25,000. When you first started out with Grandma, you were still milking a lot of cows, and
Yeah.
you weren't really heavy into the beef business at that point, were you?
No, not very much. When we got married, I had 7 head of cattle. Just, I think 4 or 5 of them were milk cows, and a few yearlings. But we managed to save some money.
Yeah.
I think it's like old Bill Charler told me that time, and he wanted to sell out to me. And incidentally, when I think about it, I never went out and tried to buy anybody's place. All I done was took the deals that were brought to me. And old Bill wanted to sell me that place down there where Art Radnor lived, you know. He was going to quit and move down below, and then he had that place up there that Wayne Pond had at that time, and I used to go with his daughter, Gussie was her name. Gussie, of all the names for a girl to have, I thought that was something, but anyway, she told me one time after we were both married that they were going to buy that place up there, so they'd be neighbors to us forever, maybe. But anyway, when Bill come to sell me the place down here, and I'd already signed a contract with the folks to buy this, and I just wasn't going to tackle anymore. I'd have probably made it all right if I had it, but anyway, and I said, I guess Bus and Gussie are going to take the Salt Creek place. Billy's got a big belly going, puffed up. Bus, hell, he couldn't buy a hole in a donut. He says, if you can save up $1, somebody will loan you another $1, and you can go buy something. But if you haven't got that first $1, nobody's going to let you have anything. And I thought about that as a good piece of advice. If you can pay 50% on about anything, you can make it. couldn't buy a hole in a donut, he said. If you could save up $1, somebody will loan you another dollar and put the $2 together and go buy something.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have that first dollar, nobody's going to let you have anything. But I guess credit things have got different since then, but it's pretty basically true anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now you can buy a house with $1,000 down.
Yeah.
$150,000 home if you wanted to mortgage all that.
And it was kind of like Vicky said down here. They're putting in a new ready-made house down here. And she told me a little while back they'd moved the old house out and getting the foundation run for the new one. And she said, I don't know whether we should have done this or not. She says, I'll be 71 years old when we get this paid for. I'd hate to think, to take on a bill like that and be that old before he could get it paid for.
Yeah. 30 years. 30-year mortgage. She's 41.
Modular.
Yeah, not a modular.
Our chipmunk has got sense enough to store a little.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I went to one of these financial meetings down there one time years ago. And one thing that speaker said, can you save money? If you can't save some money, you'll never get there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he was talking about ranchers then, but it seemed like old Dutch Bill used to say, the first 1,000 is the hardest, and after that it just seems to come.
Yeah, and adjusted for inflation today, that'd be about 10,000 now.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, now I imagine he could probably save 10,000 easier than he could then.
Yeah.
When he sold their cattle in the fall and maybe had 8 or 10 head to sell and get $15 or $20 a head for them. It'd take a long time to save up $1,000.
Well, how on earth were you and Grandma able to save $7,000 to?
I don't know.
Huh.
It didn't cost us anything to live. No, she'd used to come in, be down below and come in and throw out the things she'd bought down at the store, and she'd look at it and says, there isn't one thing in there that my mother would have bought. There was soap and toilet paper and all those things. But we had our own meat mostly. A lot of the time was just salt pork and potatoes. It had a whole, maybe a couple of big old wagon loads of potatoes and put down there in the basement or in the old cellar. And she had canned fruit and canned vegetables, hundreds and hundreds of quarts of them. That was one reason she could get a meal so quick, because she had all that stuff. All she had to do was go open some of those.
This is your mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Open those jars. And Joe kind of learned it all from Mom. She didn't know much when they got married. As far as running a house. She had never driven a car when we got married. I had to teach her to drive.
How'd she get to her school up there?
Horseback.
Horseback.
And her dad would take her up. On weekends when I wasn't around. She either stayed with Joneses or Turners. They kind of had to pass that around up there. Those people on the school board, that was about the only way they got any extra money, was boarding the school teacher. And she was getting $75 a month and doing all her own janitor work, carrying the water up the hill.
That old building still standing up there?
Yeah,
Was the last time I went by.
yeah, it's still there. Sometimes I ought to buy it, move it down there to Salt Creek Place on a hilltop somewhere.
Yeah, memorial, huh?
Yeah, kind of restore it.
Yeah.
There isn't many of those kind of buildings built anymore that slopes off all four ways. Those roofs on.
How long did she teach up there? Just a year or two, right?
Just 1 year.
Yeah. And then you found her.
Yeah.
I want to hear the story about you looking at her and she was carrying the 2 milk pails and you said, "That's the woman for me."
I went out to Idaho. Mac and I went out there one summer and just visited around a little with our relatives there in Winchester. And there was some girls that we went with, some that were friends of the folks out there. And I got back home, went down there to see her that night. And she come out of the old barn with a milk pail in each hand. And, that was it. That's the gal for me.
What do you remember most about Grandma when you first met her?
Oh, I don't know. Always was a kind of a quiet, reserved person. She always was. She never made much noise, did she? She's always pretty quiet.
Unless Dale Hawkins ticked her off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but she never made much noise about it when it did. But,
What'd you guys do on your first date?
oh, it was a blind date. I seemed like Mac had some girlfriend down there. And he got a blind date with Joe. Of course, Joe couldn't run fast enough to catch him. So that was one way he could get rid of her was get her over on to me.
What'd you do?
Huh.
What'd you do on your date? You remember?
No, I don't remember. Went to a movie, I think.
Huh. Well, how long did you and Grandma date before you got married?
Oh, probably a year, I don't know.
Where'd you get engaged?
Oh, I don't know. But the people didn't get engaged.
You just went off and did it, huh?
Yeah, they didn't get married. They didn't have weddings then. We just took off over to Glenwood and found a preacher over there, and we got married, and then we took a trip around the mountains up around Kremling, steamboat, around for a day or two, and come home and went to work. But the thing about her, of all the tough people and tough friends her and I had, like Shirley Alarmer and all those people, she was always a lady. I don't care what it was. You never heard any profanity. She was always a lady. She was never about flirting with other guys or anything. She always just, you could depend on her. I told Jack that one time, and I don't know whether he agreed with me or not, but I always felt that she was always a lady. Well, Jack said she was spoiled. That her dad always had her as her favorite, And she really wasn't the best looking woman, She was just pretty plain. She just had plain beauty. And she had terrible teeth. She should have had an orthodontist, but people didn't have any money then. She was a lot better looking after she got the false teeth. Really, had a brighter smile.
What do you remember most about those early years when you're just starting a family and newlyweds and all that? What do you remember about that?
Oh, I guess it didn't have much means of entertainment. We went to the dances they'd have down here now and then. And I don't know what else.
When did you get electricity up here?
We never had electricity until we moved down here. And they got the electricity along about that time up to Salt Creek place.
That must have made a big difference.
Oh, it did.
I've got some old family films I have to show you sometime of Grandma. When it was shot probably 1957, 1958, around then. She had a great big garden down there across the creek, and down there where the spruce trees are now, and then this here, and
Yeah,
she's like a big time farmer almost.
yeah.
All the food she
So
must
you
have
come
grown.
carrying all that stuff up here, get it ready to put in the fruit jars. Yeah, see. But people talk about the hills being tight. We always had that reputation. And I tell them I'm different than the rest of the hills. Altogether different. I was downright stingy. But anyway, the boys always said, people talk about the hills being tight. They said, Mom was always tighter than the hills. But now she knew where every dollar was. She kept a ledger. Come income tax time, she would get a new book every year and have everything in it. All you had to do was take it down to our accountant, and all you had to do was copy it over. You know, that saved. I have to pay about $1,200–1,500 a year now to do what she was doing.
Now, where was Les born? Was he born in the hospital or up there at the Salt Creek place?
He was born there. The kids were all born in the hospital.
All in Collbran?
Yeah. Yeah, we never took that chance like a lot of other people did. To take a chance on. It's just so many women died in childbirth back in those days. I tried to get the old Dr. Ziegel to, well, it seemed like part of the time there was somebody filling in for him when the kids were born, but he had the care, you know, taking care of him. And I know he had to have it so much. Had to have his money. I suppose a lot of young people probably didn't pay it, and then it was so we gave him our $35, and that took care of it with 9 days in the hospital.
Wow. $4 a day?
Sounds pretty good.
It lasts about a minute now.
Yeah. And it's hard for me to get used to all these highfalutin things anymore. But it is, and I enjoyed it all. I wish I could do it all over again. The only regret I had, I wished there'd have been more money in it, and we could have took more time off to travel. She always liked to travel, and I did too. So we could have had kept some good help around, you know, and so we could have felt free to go away for longer periods of time. I told old Wes Massey that one time. I said, hell, John, you'd never done it. You'd took that money and bought another ranch.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he's right, I don't know.
So about when did you start getting serious about the beef cattle business?
About what?
Serious about the beef cattle business?
Oh, I was always serious about that. But just getting there was a thing. I never went out and bought and the cattle. About the only time I bought cattle was to get a forest permit with them. Because you either had to buy the land or the cattle to get their permit transferred. And we just, and we, anytime that somebody had an orphan calf they wanted to get rid of, we'd get it and raise it on the bucket. And pretty much just got started that way, just kind of grew into it.
You started out primarily with Shorthorn, right? And then slowly evolved into the Hereford deal.
Yeah. Yeah, the Herefords took over for a long time. They were king there for 50 years, I suppose.
Well, I'm going to take a little break. And where all they came from. And I guess if I ask some stupid questions, I'm just trying to get some of it documented on tape, so like if Ryan's kids or somebody down the road wants to know somebody's name, I guess those are the people we're trying to talk to a little bit. I wonder if you could talk about where the, as far back as you know about the history of the Hill family and where they came from and who some of those people were.
Well, Dad was born in Oneida, New York, but I think he lived mostly in Poughkeepsie, New York. And his father worked for Nicola Taylor, back when those made suits for people, tailor-made. And then there was must have been a chain company or bigger company, because they transferred him to Kansas City when Dad was 6 or 7 years old.
Do you know anything about the family before your grandpa, where they may have come from, or?
Well, they came from England.
Uh-huh.
Diane can't retrace it all back to where even one of those girls came from. But I don't know.
How many brothers and sisters did your dad have? This had the one brother
Died after they moved to Kansas City. And that's where my grandmother died. There's two in Kansas City.
And she's still buried there, so.
Yeah. Yeah, Uncle Norman went back and went to the cemetery and knew there was a Elmwood Cemetery, was the name of the cemetery, but there wasn't any stone marker. But he went to the whoever had charge of the lots for the cemetery and found out where she was buried. And then he and Dad had a stone made and put up there.
And what was her name?
Emma.
Emma.
And she had a sister named Annie that stayed on the East Coast. I think her and her husband moved from New York down into, I don't know, Connecticut, I think.
What was her maiden name?
Cook. Well, no, wait a minute. Her middle name was Randall.
Okay.
And she had this sister, Annie, that Dad corresponded with right all his life after he went to Idaho and everywhere. And when she died, she left what she had to Dad and Uncle Norman. I think partly because she didn't have any heirs left. Her husband died, and his name was Fred Cook. Cook was his last name. And then they had a son named Malcolm Cook. That's where Mac got his name.
Yeah.
And they both died long before she did.
The Randall last name was spelled with just one L, isn't it, or is it two? Do you remember?
I can't tell you for sure.
And they came out of New York area, Connecticut.
Yeah, they were in the New York area, but I think it's Fred Cook and Aunt Annie moved, seemed like it wasn't in Rhode Island, but anyway, just south of New York anyway.
Was it New Jersey?
That sounds more like it.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing some of that.
Yeah.
Letters and things and that stuff that Mac had.
Yeah.
From New Jersey.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And I don't know how many brothers Dad had. I mean, Grandpa Hill had.
Mm-hmm.
His name was William Peter Hill. And he had one brother named Aaron that left the East quite a few years before he came, heading for California on the gold rush. They never heard another thing from him the time he left. Don't know whether he got killed or just never maintained any connection back home.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as I know, that's the only one that old Grandpa Hill had. Yeah, I suppose there might have been more, but I should have paid more attention when I was younger.
Now, Grandma's family was Stantons and the Seversons.
Yeah.
And what's kind of their history?
Well, the Stantons had come from England. They were really, really English. Because even when they have these Stanton reunions, they get some of those relatives come from England and some of them come from Australia to these Stanton reunions.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, on the Severson side, they came from Norway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, James Severson, I think was his name, came from Norway, and I think they settled it around Soldier, Iowa.
Soldier,
Yeah.
Iowa?
Yeah. And they moved from, I'm not sure they moved someplace before they came to Collbran anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And he had two families. His first wife died, and he remarried. And I don't know too much about that older family. Some of them lived down around Mesa, and one of them owned that Severson Oil Company in Grand Junction for years. And
James was Fletcher's dad.
yeah,
And how many, do you remember how many brothers and sisters Fletcher had?
yeah, there were just the four boys. There was Fletcher and Arthur and Frank and Bernie were the four sons.
And do you remember where Fletcher was born, or was he born here? Or?
No, he was born in Iowa before they came here.
Okay.
I think all the boys were born there before they moved to Collbran.
Mm-hmm. So they came straight from Iowa into the Mesa area.
I think so.
Now, Grandma was born up in Heiberger, wasn't she?
Yeah. Well, he was born there at the head of the peninsula, at that Tupper place at Gunnison. I think Susie owns it now.
Okay.
They had a big log house where the old man Severson, James Severson, homesteaded that 160 acres. And after he died, Art got half of the place, and Frank got the other half of it. And then I suppose Fletcher and Bernie probably got money when they settled the estate, but I don't know.
And from there, at some point, they did move up in the Heiberger area.
Well, Fletcher he lived up in that Harburg area pretty much, worked for Gunderson's quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Rented Gunderson Place part of the time.
Heiberger was a fairly big little community, wasn't it?
Yeah. A lot of people, those old nesters lived back in those gulches and draws there, everywhere. I think it was probably one of the bigger country schools back at that time in the valley.
Did they have any stores or anything there? Or?
No, just a post office. And they had the post office in the home because Fletcher was a postmaster for several years anyway before they moved to Mesa.
Mm-hmm. The Stanton family kind of split time between Hayden and Silver Plume, I think. They moved in Georgetown.
You know, that is, the men worked in the mines in the wintertime. The women stayed back on the ranches, I guess. And the men come in the summer, raised the hay, done the ranch work, got things ready for the women to take care of it during the winter, I guess. Then they'd go back to Silver Plume and work in the mines in the winter.
One of the genealogy things I found was one of the Stanton women was a candy maker there in Silver Plume for a while.
Oh yeah, I think Emery found some of that. Had some of that information on her, but
yeah,
I can't tell you anything about her.
And then how did what's the connection that the Stantons have to Platte Valley and Collbran and that?
Well, when they lived here in Platte Valley, they lived here on this place where Colby Olford is. And they owned the land that we have over there across the creek that we got from Virginia Robbins.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So the Robbins place is really a Stanton place.
Yeah.
Huh. Did they live over here?
Yeah, they lived up here right where Colby is now. You know, that old log house had a fireplace in it.
Mm-hmm.
Big old fireplace. And I don't know whether that fireplace is still there or not, but they tore about all of it away except that one cabin. Back in those days, people just built one and they kept adding on to it. But I don't think Stantons lived too many years here in Platte Valley because Amy's father had heart trouble and thought it'd be better to lower altitude, so they moved to Parachute.
Oh.
Spent the rest of their years there, I think.
Now, Grandma's mother's name was Amy.
Amy, yeah. Well,
And
yeah,
Amy Stanton.
yeah.
And when did she meet Fletch? Do you know much about that? About that relationship?
No, I don't, but they were married up in that Carbondale area somewhere. He was working there on a ranch, I think, where they raised a lot of potatoes. And I'm sure that's where they were married. But I don't know. I suppose they met here somewhere.
Isn't there one of Fletch's brothers or some of the Seversons that worked over there on the Ken Carl Ranch over there in Denver?
Yeah, Frank did. He worked over there for years. Milked cows by hand when they had all those hand milkers.
And there's some connection to South Park too? Didn't they live up in that area, Fairplay or something?
I don't think so. No, I think when Frank left over there, he come directly back here to Mesa and bought the place down there that Himes Dead and Company had. And his wife was a Mao, M-O-W, old Jim Mao's daughter. He was quite a cowman in this country in the early day, I guess.
And then when Fletch and Amy got married, they eventually moved down into the Mesa area.
Well, I think they moved from there to the Hyberg area and then to Mesa.
Okay. And they just, when you live in the Hyberg area, you say they were working for Gundersons and maybe raising a few of their own cows.
And they homesteaded where that house that they were living in wasn't part of the homestead. The homestead was down across Buzzard Creek in the south on that mountainside. And they had a temporary cabin there where they spent so many months of the year to comply with the Homestead Act and improved up on that land.
Now they lived for a while in that house that Ole Gunderson lived in, didn't they?
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe they were living there when they had the post office. And I don't know how many years they run that place.
Yeah. Well, how old was Grandma then when they moved down to the Mesa area?
I think she was in the 3rd grade, but she was ahead of herself as far as the age.
Now, Grandma had how many brothers and sisters?
Well, Jim was the oldest, and then Virgie, and then Joe, and Jack, I guess, the 4 of them.
Okay.
I haven't left out anybody, have
I don't think so. And Fletcher grew a lot of berries and things down there, didn't he?
Yeah, he had probably 15 acres of berries.
What kind of berries do you remember?
Well, mostly raspberries, I think. Raspberries, the red and the black raspberries both. Sold them to Safeway. They had to deliver them to Grand Junction and Rifle, I think, in both places.
What?
And they raised other kind of berries too, so, but that was the
Main business.
was the raspberry.
What kind of man was Fletcher? What do you remember about him?
Oh, he's just a good, honest, hard-working man. He liked to visit, like all those old-timers. That's the only way communication I had, I guess.
What about Amy? What do you remember about her?
Well, she was a kind of a nice, quiet, reserved kind of a person. A hard worker. She was. As I said, I had the perfect mother-in-law, but I didn't have her very long.
And she died of cancer, what, about 1943 or so?
I don't remember what year Alan was born. She died just before Alan was born, anyway. That summer, and Alan was born in September.
And how long did Fletcher live?
Well, that's fine, and he died in about 1960, but I'd have to look on the stone up there.
Yeah. Now are both Fletcher and Amy buried up here above the house?
Yeah. And Virgie and them are both buried up there.
Are there any other Seversons that are buried up here?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of them. There's the older Severson that say it came, that homesteaded up there. His stone is there.
James?
James, yeah.
Was there any connection to the Gunnarsons and the Seversons back in Norway?
I
Do you
don't
know?
think so.
They just kind of crossed paths when they got over here.
Well, Ed Gunderson's wife, Pansy, trying to think of how I think was a cousin to Fletch, but I'm not sure.
But the Gunnarsson family didn't know the Seversons when they were still in Norway.
Oh, I don't think so.
That wasn't the reason that they all came here, I guess.
And see, Pansy's maiden name was Kesterson.
Mm-hmm.
There are several of those Kesterson girls. One of them married Ray Griffith. Trying to think of a fellow that owned a place where I'll think of his name after a bit.
Mm-hmm. What do you know about Grandma's childhood? Anything about that stands out that she told you later on?
No.
Things that she did, or
You see, I'm trying to figure these family connections. The Bunkers came here the same time the Stantons did. And the Bunkers had the place that we got up Salt Creek for a short time.
the Campbell place?
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know that either. There's a lot of connections in there.
Yeah. And I think Billy Cox's wife was a Bunker. See, who would have been Lily Jones's mother.
Mm-hmm. The Bunkers and Stantons kind of follow each other around, didn't they?
Yeah, they came into the country together.
And how were they connected or related?
I don't know whether they were. Well, I see. Joe's mother, Amy's mother, was a Bunker.
Okay.
And that's the way it is.
I think the Bunkers spent some time in Hayden and also in Silver Plume, Georgetown, I think.
Yeah.
They kind of worked together,
Yeah,
it seems
they worked
like.
together, and it seemed like there was another family along about that time too.
The Stantons homesteaded there on the west side of that Carpenter Ranch up in Hayden.
Yeah.
And picture over here. And I guess did Ferry buy them out, or was that land, did that go on to somebody else?
No, I think the guy before him, this old boy that I got the book on, was the one that bought Stantons out.
Okay. And Ferry used a lot of the cabins to build his own house.
Yeah.
Slip those across the field and reassemble them, I guess.
Yeah.
And Grandma, she graduated from school down there in Mesa, is that right?
Yeah.
And
1935, I think.
then she went to college at Mesa, right?
Yeah, the Mesa College.
Yeah.
That was when they had it down on Colorado Avenue.
And she went for a couple of years, or I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's all she had. That's all they had to have was 2 years, and they could get their teaching certificate then.
Now, did she take this job up Salt Creek, right out of college then?
Yeah,
And how long did she teach up there?
just 1 year.
And then you met at some point along there.
Yeah, I don't. It was when she was still going to college down there when I first met her. And Or she worked in the berries during the summertime. They're at home. I guess they employed a lot of those kids or young people picking berries there. It took a lot of berry pickers, I guess.
Did they have many dairy cows around at that point, or was it all berries?
No, they had a little bunch of cows, I don't know, 8 or 10 probably.
Mm-hmm. And that place that they lived on down there is just kind of west and a little south of Mesa.
Yeah.
I don't remember how big it is, but
I think it was 80 acres to start with, and then he sold part of it laid across Mesa Creek to the east, next to that road that comes down by the old Bevan's place. And he sold that off to a guy from Parachute that was a guy that talked him into going into berry business. And I don't know how long that guy raised berries there too. It was just a small portion of the place that Fletch and Amy had.
I know Grandma had a lot of raspberry bushes out here too for a long time.
Boy, she could pick a lot of berries in a little while.
Yeah, especially given her arthritic hands.
Yeah.
I don't know how she did it.
Jack used to do a lot of the hauling the berries. They had them in boxes some way, however Safeway wanted them.
Did they have to keep them in an ice box or something to keep them cool? Or?
No, I think they just tried to market them at the end of every day.
Mm-hmm.
They'd start picking pretty early in the morning when it's cool, and then just load them and take them to the store that afternoon.
How long did they do this? Up until about what year, do you remember?
I don't know. They didn't keep them. They had quit before Amy died anyway. Or practically quit anyway.
What did Fletch do for income after he stopped doing that? Do you remember? Was he?
Well, just what cattle I had, and then after she passed away, Fletch didn't figure on running the place himself very much. He kind of leased it to Jack, and Jack didn't want it. Then he had to go back and run it himself. That's about the time he got that poison. He got poisoned on some food poisoning. I don't know. It took him quite a while to get over that.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time, Jim and Doritha were moving to Idaho, and Jack and Ada moved out there too. And he worked in some of those places where they were chopping hay. I don't know how many years he was there before he come back and lived with us.
Mm-hmm. What connection was there to Idaho that the Seversons had? Just a place to go, or is there family up there too, or?
Well, it was Emery had been there before he and Virgie got married, I think. Worked some there. I think Emery's father was a teacher or minister, and he lived in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where Emery first worked there. Some after they left Oak Creek. think his dad had a teaching job in that steamboat area for a few years. And I think they moved out there.
Hmm.
And then Emery came back, and I don't know, I think he and Virgie got married. And soon after they married, they moved to Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
He went to that Nazarene College, I think, in Nampa, or got his education there after he. See, Emery worked for the sugar beet company in Grand Junction. He got his hand caught in that one of those conveyors, and just ruined his whole hand. So he had to learn to do something that he didn't have to do with his hands so much. The reason he went into the teaching.
Yeah. Well, he was he originally from Oak Creek?
No.
Throat getting dry?
No.
I need a drink.
Emery's dad taught school in Mesa. I suppose that's where Emery got acquainted with Virgie.
Well, how many kids up here did Grandma teach for that year? Do you remember what life was like up there for her on that job?
Oh no, I'd guess probably around 12, 15. All 8 grades.
Had that school building been built before she was up there, or they built it for?
No, it had been built for years before that.
You were talking the other day about how she had to pack water up in there, and
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, she got $75 a month. Done her own janitor work.
You said they had a well or a spring there or something?
Yeah, I think so. Just an open spring, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody furnished the wood, so all she had to do was carry it in and build the fires.
You say she had to, she stayed with a lot of people in the neighborhood. She didn't have a home of her own, I guess, up there.
No, she had to pay board. Jones's kept her part of the time, and Turner's kept her part of the time. And I think maybe she lived with the Robinson family part of the time.
The Robins? Or
No, Robinson.
Robinson.
Old Bill Robinson. And Robinson's daughter married Ivan Camel. That is his daughter by his first wife. Then he got married again after his first wife died and raised this younger family. Mm-hmm. And they were the kids that Joe taught in school. I think there was 3 of them in there, 4 of them, I guess. 4 of the Robinson kids. And there was several of Branson's, Harv Branson's children.
The same folks that ended up having the restaurant down there in town. Is that Branson's?
Yeah. Yeah, it was See, Harv Branson is Hugh Branson's father, and Hugh was one of her students up there. There was Hugh and Howard, and the younger one. There was the three boys and one girl, and I suppose they all went to school there. Oh, I don't know. She might have had near 20. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm gonna feed these bulls real quick.
Almost one of the Jones boys might have been one of her students too.
I bet it was closer to 20.
Hmm?
I said I bet it was closer to 20.
Yeah, I bet it was. No bigger than that was. I don't know how she ever done it.
I bet she was a good teacher.
Yeah.
Patient as she was.
Think how when the kids are growing up and all the neighbors' kids that he'd sit up here on the couch and read. There wasn't a kid down on the floor. They was all up there listening to what she had to read. She was such a good reader. Put so much expression in it.
Go ahead, you can talk some more about that. That's
What?
That's good. Good stories about Grandma. Good recollections about her.
Yeah, she had a lot of patience.
Well, I know you've shared with me some stories about how you used to get cattle over to like the Beck over there, put them on the trains and those kinds of things. You know, what was it like? What did you do, and what was it like raising cattle and making a living up here? You know, in the earlier days.
That's pretty much like I've said before, that we had a lot of those dual-purpose cattle. So we had cattle to sell in the fall to make the payments. But nobody had a lot of them. But there's usually some of the neighbors would get together, you know, and have enough of them so they could make up carloads. Those freight cars weren't big like these semis now. About 20 head of yearlings, about all you could put in those freight cars. But we'd start out here with them and drive down to where Dr. Benny Nichols is. And then maybe the next day, whichever way we were going, we'd go across the old high road over the sunny side and down the Horse Thief Canyon. Then we'd get to Quebec, to the Bluestone area that evening usually. Or if we went the other way, we'd go down the first day down to where Teddy Walker lives, at Doug Harris on that then, and he'd feed our cattle, had a pen there, and he'd feed them some hay. Then the next day we'd go across the present road to Quebec.
Wasn't a lot of water there to get water those cattle up, wasn't along the way.
No, there wasn't.
Did you normally take those cattle? Come here. How many people normally went with you?
Oh, it'd be four or five people, maybe 5 or 6, depending who all had cattle.
About how many head of cattle did you take over there? 100 or so? Or?
Yeah, I'd say not more than 100 usually.
You rode the rails over there with them too, didn't you? Quite a bit.
Well, not very much. Dad usually went with the cattle when they went on to Denver with them. I went a couple of times, I think, and he rode that old caboose. That's where the cowboys all rode to get to Denver. But he'd get over there on the Bluestone, and the old Parker Brown or Latham Brothers or somebody would had a pen that they'd feed our cattle. And the next day if depending on whether the freight cars were there or not, we'd go across the bridge and through the town of DeBeck, and then down west across Roan Creek, and on out of ways there, and then we'd have to go back across the railroad track, and they had the stockyards there on the south side of the railroad track, right on this side of that Asher place that Dick Latham has now. But that was a trick, getting across that bridge. Oh, those cattle weren't used to automobiles and all that noise, and you had to be real careful not to let them run any, because that old bridge had those big side rails on it and all those truss rods. If they'd start to run a little and shake those, it'd scare them. They'd stampede and go on across, or they'd split and part of them go back and part of them go across. But if he just had the guy on the point, or maybe two guys, hold them back enough so they wouldn't get into a run, just keep them in a walk, you'd get across there pretty good. Then after we got across the bridge, we had to go under that railroad trestle, and then into town, go through the city of DeBeck.
Like the old West days.
Sometimes some of those cattle wouldn't cross and go back. He'd get them back down to Latham's, and Latham's had a flatbed truck that they would haul them across for us. Could get them in a corral there.
What, is this normally in the fall, this time of year?
Yeah, it'd be this time of year and maybe a little earlier, but ordinarily around election time, first part of November anyway.
What do you remember about riding over there with the cattle and going over the Denver stockyards and all that?
Well, the main thing that always bothered me was going through that Moffat Tunnel. What is it, 6 miles long? Or how bad that train smoke got in there. I don't know how we lived through it.
Was it smoke from the wood stove in the caboose, or was it smoke from the engine?
Both.
Both.
Pretty much.
Huh. Just coal black in there, or just...
Yeah. They always used to say that was good advertisement for our cattle. They knew they come from the western slope because they had all that soot on them when they got into the Denver yards. Yeah, they could just walk down over that trestle and look down and tell the cattle had come through the tunnel.
Did the train stop anywhere else to get cattle, or was this the main pickup point here?
Well, it was, let's see, we used to pick up some more in Rifle and Silt, but it don't seem like after we left there it picked up much more. And in the Newcastle area and in there, I don't remember for sure, which place that picked up the most.
Well, what was the process once you got them to Denver and unloaded them? What did they do with the cattle there in the stockyards?
Well, they'd sort them for size and quality. That was one reason they pooled the cattle pretty much, because nobody had enough of them by themselves for a pen of cattle. So they'd pool them and put them in those yards. We usually got in there, it seemed like on Saturday, and then they'd spend Sunday getting the cattle ready. They had people just like they do now, sorting them and sizing them and And then the market opened on Monday morning. And there was different commission companies owned certain sections of the yards. And they had, of course, their calves in one alley and the year in another alley. And then if they had cows, it'd be maybe in another alley. They call it the cow alley or the calf alley. But usually they had lots of buyers then, didn't any just many of those traders buy them. There's a lot of those farmer feeders from all up north towards Fort Collins bought most of the cattle. Montfort got to where they bought a lot of them. But they'd blow that whistle when the market opened in the morning. It sounded like a freight train whistle or so. And then the people waiting at the end of the alley to want to bid on the cattle, they had a jar, and they had the peas in that, and then they would draw from that on who got the bid first on the cattle. And that bid was good until I've forgotten sometime in the afternoon. And then if they didn't sell then, maybe they'd have to wait till the next day to get them sold. But they cleared them all out pretty much the first day, because the second day they were usually coming in with fats out of a lot of those feed yards up north.
Well, when you had a pen of cattle there, how did they tell you what your price they were giving you? Were you in a position to accept that price, or did somebody else handle that for you?
That commission man handled it.
Okay.
You could reject it if you wanted to, but if you usually wasn't very good judgment to go against whatever they had on it, they'd have several bids, and usually accept the high bid.
What did you do when the cattle were selling? Were you with the cattle, or were you?
Oh, we'd just see to it the cattle were fed and watered. Was the main thing. Because if they made the sale, then of course they'd start weighing them. They'd get them up to those scales, and then they'd have to sort for brands for each people's cattle and weigh them separate. Then they'd go back into that same carload of cattle that they had in the pen. But that was the main thing, to see to it they were fed and watered.
How'd you get home?
Well, most of the time I just get on the Zephyr train and come home. On the train. Now and then there'd be somebody over there in a car. We could all ride back together. But well, most of the time it seemed like when Uncle Norman and I went together, we just got on that California Zephyr. Came back that way.
Did you stay in a hotel down there nearby the stockyards then, or?
No, we stayed up in downtown, 18th in California, I think. So we usually stayed in that old President's Hotel, just a hotel, and then they had that freight car, that cable car thing that you could get on and ride down to the stockyards. It seemed like that cable thing had a thing that ran up to the cable, an electric thing, and they could weave around down the streets with them. But that's usually the way we got to the stockyards and got back from the stockyards. And most of us that didn't stay at the old President hotels, those guys stayed across the street in the Standish Hotel. But if you want to get a hold of any of the Collbran or Platte Valley people, they'd be in one or the other of those hotels.
So most of you folks would come over all together, and
yeah, they'd come. Usually market on the same day.
of that week anyway.
Mm-hmm. Denver must seem like another world when you go over there.
Yeah. Because it all down around the stockyards wasn't built up like it is now. They had that old stadium where they held the stock shows, but
Hey.
their Coliseum wasn't there then.
Did you ever come over for the stock show in those days?
Well, it wasn't that far back. I think by the time I started going to stock show, we were trucking the cattle then.
Mm-hmm.
Then when they trucked them, I'd ride over on a truck a lot of times. So I'd be home to help put chains on Vale and Loveland Pass if we had to.
Yeah. That was probably quite an ordeal getting over the mountains in a truck.
It was, especially when I had to go over Loveland. Of course, I think we usually had more trouble on Vale than we did on Loveland because Vale always had more snow.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Loveland was a booger up towards the top of that wind, blowing that snow in.
What do you think has been the single biggest improvement for ranching and marketing cattle and raising cattle in your lifetime?
Well, you just have to say the trucks probably was the thing that helped more.
Mm-hmm.
So you just come to your place and pick the cattle up and haul them. You didn't have to take 2 or 3 days driving to Quebec. And then a lot of times you get those cattle loaded in those cars at Quebec, especially if they didn't have a switch engine there. If they just had the suction crew with those pinch bars moving those cars up to the load chutes, they say you load it from the side.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they'd be all day getting a trainload of those cattle loaded there.
Yeah, I bet they didn't go on there very well, did they?
No. But the trucks made it easier.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt about it.
I know one time you commented that the gooseneck trailer was one of the best inventions ever. Made it pretty easy to load cattle and
Yeah.
horses.
That wouldn't have so much to do with the marketing. It's just the day-to-day things we had to do with them. It was a long time before they got these pot-bellied trucks to haul cattle in. Most of those old trucks were just straights. Some of them were just Maley still had 1 or 2 of those old bobtail trucks. Just a ordinary ranch truck with a stock rack on them.
Mm-hmm.
But most of those old trailers just those straights before they got those pot bellies. Well, when they got them, then they started loading a lot of cattle.
Yeah, you get a lot of cattle moved in a hurry too.
Yeah. Put a whole crowd full of cattle in one of those pot-bellied trucks.
Yeah. Well, when you first moved to Collbran, what memories do you have of that? What do you remember the first time you ever got a chance to look around much, and remember what your initial impressions were?
Well, one of the first things I can remember before we even got to Collbran, down there where they got those chickens running wild, down there below where Highway 65 splits, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There was some boys had some saddle horses there. They had some corrals there, like where there's corrals are now. And I just, boy, that was just really inspired me. I might get to be a cowboy. But then from there on, I don't remember too much about it. And we stayed up there with Uncle Norman and Aunt Minnie a few days before we got moved in here to where we could get by.
Mm-hmm. Was this driveway in at that time, or?
Yeah, but it was real narrow.
Was there a road connecting the two places, or did you still have to go around like
Yeah,
you do
had
now?
to go. Of course, we never went around. I had a gate up here.
Yeah.
Drove through.
You arrived in April,
Yeah.
so it's still probably kind of wintry around here a little bit, I suppose.
I can't remember too much about it. And the main thing that I can remember, there was only 2 families in the neighborhood that had enough money to own a radio. They had those radios with those earphones.
Mm-hmm.
Gunnarson's had one, and old John Anderson had one. I can remember. You'd get invited to those places to listen to the radio. We'd have to take turns and put those earphones on to listen to the radio. Then you'd try to get on when those trying to think of those black people that had the radio programs.
I don't remember. You listen to a lot of baseball games that way?
No,
Just mostly entertainment shows.
no. Of course, nobody listened to radio during the daytime. Maybe somebody did on Sundays, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The first radio we had after we got married was one on a 6-volt car batteries. When it ran down, you couldn't afford 2 batteries. You had to take it downtown and get it charged. So you didn't have any radio for 2 or 3 days. The main thing was this terrible road we had from here to Collbran. Didn't have any gravel on it. It just an old dirt road. In the summertime, there were a lot of chuck holes. In the wintertime, there's a lot of mud in the spring. How that mud used to roll up on the tires. The people didn't drive their cars then. You had the old team in the buggy or team in the wagon. That mud would roll up on those wheels. Old George the Cray said one time that he got stuck going down the hill with a 4-horse team and an empty wagon. And he wasn't exaggerating. Oh, that mud on those wheels, it was only that wide, but that mud would roll up to where we'd have to take a shovel and clean that mud off to get to where the horses could pull that wagon. Of course, most of the time, us kids just rode school horseback, and that didn't bother us. Only get in a horse race and splash mud over each other.
So when did you get your first chance to do much cowboying?
Oh, I guess when we'd ride over there on Hawks's Creek.
Was that kind of the original range that you had to for
Yeah.
your house?
Yeah, I think that was. Dad might have run cattle on Brush Creek the first year, but then I think he got on Hawks's Creek because it was closer.
Yeah. Well, how did you trail cattle over there? Did you go all the way down to Collbran and back up? Or?
No, we came through hills and crossed Buzzard Creek, up a trail and come out up here on this Wilson place, they call it. Old John Anderson owned it then anyway. And he had cattle on Hawks's Creek, and Uncle Norman did, so that was kind of one reason, I suppose, Dad got in on that, so we could bring our cattle all over together. That was a steep old trail up that hill, but you give them time, they'd come out.
Yeah. How long did it take to get up in there?
Well, didn't take too long if those cattle were coming home. I mean, in the fall they'd come through pretty good. Of course, it started in up there working McCurry's cattle, and old Jeff Snipes had the place that Kennedy had there. And then Ray and Bert Griffith both had cattle, and because they lived on down the road towards Collbran. And the place that Nels Warner had was the one that Bert Griffith had. And Ray Griffith had the one up on top of the hill there on the north side. But we started working cattle. We just go up to that gate every morning, as they called it, and gather what cattle was there, and hardly ever go up country and drive any down because they didn't want them home anyway. But it probably worked about every other day.
Mm-hmm. I'm out of tape.
Daughters?
Yeah, but deliver me, boy.
On your way.
You're fine.
So you didn't run off with one of his other daughters then?
No. Probably wouldn't have had me anyway.
Bert, you want to sit over here so we can hear your voice?
Yeah.
I'll be right back. Okay. Where are you going?
You can brush your teeth.
Yeah.
These can go good.
Yeah. Well, what do you remember about Claude?
The first place is the most bow-legged man I ever saw. He was born to fit a horse. And he kind of a man of few words. He didn't talk a lot, but he meant what he said.
He was kind of a veteran of the old sheep and cattle wars.
Well, it wasn't so much with the sheep, just the competition I had between the ranchers in Plateau Valley.
Do you remember much about what he told you about that period of time?
Well, not a lot. One said that when he went to one of their other camps or their cabin, he always got a chair in the corners so nobody could get behind him. He always had a lot of peculiar ideas, but I guess they worked anyway.
Like what?
Like when he was staying in that old cabin we used to own up there, and when he'd be by himself, he'd leave a light burning in the cabin, and he'd go back in the Quakers behind the cabin and take his bedroll out there. They said if I had company during the night, I could see who was there first.
Were those days really that violent, you think?
I think they were.
I guess there was a guy that got hanged down in Collbran one there, a black man or something, during that time period.
I don't know. The only black man I can remember was Charlie Glass. Was down around that Fruta area. The first time I went to a rodeo down there at Collbran, I probably hadn't seen more than 2 or 3 Negroes in my life till I saw him. But he was a good bronc rider and just one of those old rough cattlemen. Nobody crossed him, I guess. Quite a poker player and a gambler. But I can see him yet today when he come out of that chute on that bucking horse. His old face was just as black as a ace of spades, you know. But he could sure ride. I've got a book down there that's got some of the stuff about old Charlie Glass. He finally got in a poker game, and I don't know whether he's cheating, but anyway, the guys took him out there on the desert and killed him. That was the end of him. Of course, he was getting to be a guy, I suppose, 40, 50 years old.
Now, did he work for somebody, or did he have his own outfit?
No, he just worked for those big outfits like Siebers, and those in that Book Cliff and Pinyon Mesa country. I don't think he ever worked up in this country at all. He was kind of the old Walt Carmichael of that country, that old Walt was up here.
The other day you were talking about the Roach Camp and all the things that were up there in the cabin and the milk cows. And if you could talk a little bit about that, how he had that set up.
Well, the Roaches had one of those summer permits for milk cows. They could go up there and they had where I had that camp, which was just a special use permit, but they had a good cabin from the family lived in that. Claude never had any sons. He had all those daughters. I don't know. It must have been 5 or 6 of them anyway. They'd go up there in the summer and milk those cows. Every cow had a bell on it. They just run them out there, and in the daytime, and those girls would gather those cows up and bring them in at night, and milk the cows, and then they'd leave them in at night in that small pasture, turn them back out in the morning, and gather them every day that way.
How many cows did he milk?
Oh, might have had 20 or 30 probably.
And then just haul the cream out?
Yeah.
Did he have a truck up there or something?
No, just haul that cream in those 10-gallon cream cans. Which, you know, you go to those cows, you know, they weren't like cows nowadays. Suppose most of them give a gallon apiece, probably.
How often did they bring the cream out?
Oh, they'd have to bring it out pretty often, about every other day, I think. Didn't have any way to cool it up there, only just had a spring. And back in those Quakers, the water was pretty cold.
Well, was there a creamery up toward that way, like toward Heiberg or anything?
No, they had to come to the creamery down there in Coleman with it. Of course, we had 1 or 2 cream receiving stations beside the creamery. I had 2 here at one time, but I think the old Mutual Creamery is the one that stayed the longest, probably. And all of course, then they didn't have to keep that cream sweet. They just made sugar. I mean, they just made butter, even if it was sour cream. And then when the school started, well, the family had moved down with the milk cows to the ranch down there on Kimball Creek. And old Claude stayed up there. And then when I got done haying, I could go up and work with him.
What was your day-to-day job that you were doing for him mostly? Riding? Or?
Yeah, just mostly riding. We dug potatoes a day or two, and gathered some garden stuff. You know, those women and girls raised. They had 2 gardens up there. One up along that draw that come out from our spring, and that they could irrigate that. And they raised a lot of turnips and carrots and things like that on it. But that other garden was just down there at the edge of the Quakers, and it was just strictly potatoes, and they didn't have any irrigation water for them. But boy, those are good potatoes, raised up there in that old black dirt, you know. And we ate lots of potatoes.
Mr. Burt.
No, Selman.
Oh.
But we'd always jingle the horses the night before at his camp. Those guys up at the oil well camp, they just jingle them in the morning and it's ready for them, I guess. But Claude always had me get the horses in at night, and then whatever days we thought we had to milk the cows, when he'd leave 2 old cows or the calves up there, and then I'd just run them in at night and feed them a little hay and shut the calf away from them. I'd milk them in the morning, and then we'd let that cream rise there during the day, and then skim the cream off the milk to make butter with.
Where did the horse pasture sit?
The horse pasture?
Yeah.
Well, it was all from the time you left the creek where his camp was till they got up to our pasture, and then down to the mouth of Owens Creek, and they went west quite a ways, and then back up the hill and hooked onto our pasture.
Oh, okay.
So we had that willow attached down there for the horses.
Mm-hmm.
But I sat a many a night there with we had those 5-pound lard buckets. We put that cream in. I'd shake that until they had butter.
Mm-hmm.
Old Claude, he'd be peeling potatoes, so he could, and boiling potatoes that night before. And the potatoes about so big, and I'd churn the butter, and he'd peel the potatoes and get the potatoes boiled. Mm-hmm. In the morning, he'd put those potatoes in the skillet. He always just took a tin can, chopped them up in that skillet. And we had lots of butter to put on them. And he usually had some venison to eat. And when he leave camp in the morning, he had an old skillet there with some bacon in it. He'd set that up in the warming oven on the stove, and he'd say, well, now, if we have company today when we're not home, they can see what we had for breakfast. We never ate any bacon, we ate buckskin.
What do you think? You talk about Claude a lot. What do you think was the biggest impression he made on your life? And what did you learn the most from him?
Well, that you need to follow orders, I think, was the main thing. Because the night that I got up there, I'll always thank him for this too. He set me down and put me through a school on range etiquette. The first thing was you didn't ride into a bunch of cattle until the range boss told you to. That was an unwritten law. And he said, never ask the boss where he wants you to go. He says, he'll tell you. And just a lot of little things like that that saved me a lot of embarrassment, maybe, because I was pretty eager then, you know. I wanted to get to work. And he had good horses, because he had a forest permit for horses back up there on Crane Creek. Run those mares up there and the raised their colts right up there. But boy, they were salty, raised that way, you know, raised wild. But they were good, strong horses. But just a lot of little things, like he said, he didn't get me warned soon enough till I got out there before old Harry Castle, and he was cutting cattle, and nobody else was on the side where Harry was cutting. They all knew better, because he'd come out there, with 12 head ahead of him, and hold this one, let that one go, and hold this one. And I like to run that little old horse of his to death that first day, and got back into camp that night. Claude gave me a talking to on that. He says when somebody's cutting cattle like that, he says, turn them all back. He's supposed to be cutting those cattle, you're not. And he had a lot of truth in that too. He was one of the best ropers I ever saw. He wouldn't be a roper for nowadays, because maybe when you had 1,000 head of cattle there in one bunch, and maybe brand 50 to 80 calves every day. Those calves are born during the summer after they turned out. And he always roped overhanded. And he'd just roll around through a bunch real easy, and if I found a calf with a cow, he'd just get that calf just like that and bring it to the fire. Here come old Castle waving his rope, and cattle going that way. The cows were all, you'd have to wait till they got paired up again. But old Claude, he could go back just a little bit and pick up another calf, that he saw with his mother. Boy, that was something. That's the one thing that I'll admire old Castle for. He taught me how to hip lock those calves. It was sure easy to throw them in when I was young and active, and bring one of those big old Bellerin calves up on the end of the rope, a bucking and balling, you go down the rope to get that calf, and get down there, you don't know whether to take him or turn around and run. But anyway, that depended a lot on the roper. He had to keep that calf moving until you got back alongside and reach over and get that flank. And they just fall over backwards. And you just be behind the calf just enough you had a hold of his flank. And you could get up there and get a hold of his front leg. But if that roper made a mistake and pulled that calf a foot or two too far, you couldn't make it. But you had to keep that calf moving, or you couldn't bust him. You had to keep him jumping a little. But boy, there was a couple of those boys from Divide Creek that were good at that too, that had come over with Joe Scheidler and that Earl Record. We used to have a lot of fun.
So they brand a lot of those cattle after they were up there then.
Oh yeah, the people never took their bulls away then. You had calves born all summer. But and the main thing was when that roper brought that calf in, and he would just tell you what brand, and boy, you better remember. If you say, "Oh, I forgot," well, you got to turn that calf loose again and let him go back and pair up with his mother. So you had to be careful of that. That was one thing old Claude was a grouch about. And everybody carried those saddle irons then. Nobody had an iron with a long handle to brand with. We just had those rings and D's carried on the saddle, and we always cut a bunch of willows to put through those rings and bend them this way. Usually had one guy up there with a long green willow fishing those irons out of the fire, And so when the next brander come, he had a fresh iron to get.
So the willow was just to give something cool to hold on to. As an extension on the iron, is that what you mean?
Well, there wasn't any handle on the iron at all. They were just a ring.
Okay.
You had willow sticks about this long.
Okay.
They usually cut a bunch of them before we started branding over there in the willow patch.
Yeah.
You put one through this way and one that way, and then bend them back like this and take a hold. And then when you got that side used, you whip it around and get another hot place on the iron.
Could you get a clean brand with that?
Oh yeah, I liked the brand of that really better than I did with iron handles. But it was just a nuisance cutting the sticks and it just wasn't as handy as it was when you had the handle on the irons. And then, of course, when they got all done, you'd scrape all that ashes away, and everybody go pick up his iron when it got cold enough, you know. Tie it back on your saddle strings.
You didn't do much roping up there then, huh?
I didn't do any. They had good ropers up there then. Boy, that Paul Sowers from Divide Creek, he was just like old Claude Roach. But Claude was getting so boogered up in his shoulders that he really wasn't such a good roper then. But the thing about him, he knew cattle, you know. He always got the right calf for the right cow, and he never stirred the bunch up because he went through them real quiet.
Well, where did these guys learn their skills? Were they all from here, or did they come from somewhere else?
No, they just grew up here.
Yeah. Claude wasn't from Texas or something like that, or
No. There was a few of those guys like old Bill Kenny and Dan Kenny that come in here from Utah. Down I don't know just what of Utah. They were from the old school, but they run cattle on Leon. I didn't ride with them much up there. Of course, old Bill Kenny died just seemed like right soon after we came to the country.
Now, who did Claude ride for? It wasn't the whole pool like we know it now. There were just 3 or 4 ranches that he rode for specifically, right?
Yeah, there was part of those guys that lived up around the Drift Gate, like Curriers and Van den Hoel, and Dutch Bill Van den Hoel, and George Ducray. Some of those guys, he just had a little pool of his own that he took care of those cattle. Furnace of Salt, and he and Walt Carmichael was the boss for the pool. George McKelvey was the guy that took the bid to run the pool, and then Walt Carmichael worked for George. And then Roach just had this little bunch of guys. I suppose he probably done it for half as much as those Walt and those guys done, because they had to bring those cattle all down here to Pool Corral here and work them, and then go from there over to, they didn't have a corral downtown then, they took them from here over to where Aaron Culp lived mostly, I think, and worked them from there. Part of those cattle went clear to Mesa. There was quite a few permittees down at Mesa. There was the Balls and Carvers, and quite a lot of those people that had cattle from down there. And then you can see why it was that way, that Curriers and them didn't think they ought to have to pay that full amount. But then I guess the Forest Service and the pool got their heads together and forced it all under one pool. It just a matter of 3 or 4 years there.
How many permittees were there altogether?
All around 50.
Oh, really?
54, I think you said at one time. And of course we had the Muddy with it then, and Porter Creek and Beaver Creek, where Castle and Chapman, those guys got out.
Big country. Big country.
Oh, it was.
Were there any cross fences at that point? Was it all open?
It was all open. The only fences there was just those homesteads like ours was. Kelly's down there on Porter Creek. And that old place up on Owens Creek, Cox's had.
Did Gunderson's have that homestead in Willow Creek?
No,
Still?
No, it was just a special use permit.
Oh, it was.
They used to issue those special use permits because back in those days, nobody sold calves. Everybody run the yearlings. That's what they call the beef ride, that first one we'd had. That's when we'd brand the cows, and we'd cut the beef out and just run the cows back up a draw. And maybe they wouldn't gather them till 1st of November or later. I remember Walt saying one fall, he says, everybody wants them now, but Tom McKelvey and Ed Stewart, and they're going to get them anyway. You start down the road with them. But those cattle didn't seem to have to come home then like they do now. They were used to staying back.
Just leave them up there till they snowed out most years.
Till the feed, until so much snow got on what little feed there was.
Yeah.
That they'd have to bring them out. Of course, they'd work those sedge meadows, those places, more then than they do now, I think.
How many cattle were there altogether?
I think there was somewhere over 5,000 permitted. And then when they got from that range improvement thing, they had to take a 50% cut. Boy, that was a banger for people, you know, to have to take half of them off.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pretty valuable experience for you to be able to get up and get familiar with that country, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. But Claude was a good guy to work for. He never bothered me. He told me what he wanted me to do. And then after we get that beef ride over and maybe part of the cows and calves out, he had emphysema real bad and he couldn't stay up in that cold country. And he'd just leave me up there alone, you know. And he'd come up once in a while, and when it's getting late, he says, well, have you heard the hoodowls yet? No. Well, I guess we can stay a little longer. And if you hear the hoodowls, well, I think we better pack our bed and get moved out.
Did you ever hear them?
Yeah, I did. Fly around there and those Quakers are hooting like mad. About before it was going to storm.
About what time of year was that?
Oh, it just depended on the year.
Oh, I thought that indicated that the winter was setting in or something.
Yeah, well, of course, winter would come in a lot earlier some years, too. But he hardly ever follow a trail. If you come to a trail, he'd pick a narrow place to cross it so nobody could track him. He just kind of, I don't know whether he had any Indian blood in him or not, but he was the kind of a suspicious kind of a guy. No, there's one time we were riding over on Porter Creek, Beaver Creek, and we push up to Dead Mare Park and work there and brand the calves, cut the beef off. And that's when George McKelvey had that Willow Creek pasture that Gunderson's had down. They'd take the beef down there, shut them in there until it was ready to sort them and come out with them. But anyway, Claude just sent me over there to meet those guys at the Gander Pond, and we pushed up all that country and gathered there in Dead Mare Park. I can remember that was another time I got a talking to when I got back to camp that night. Old Jess Bird and Walt Carmichael had those dogs, you couldn't control them. They just run in and take after every cow. The cow followed the calf into the bunch ground when they was dragging the calf in. Darn dogs would get after the cow. The old cow got on top of me and I was holding the calf down there, and I thought she's going to stomp me to death before I got out of that. Claude says, if those guys can't control their dogs, turn that calf loose. Let it go. And says, don't fool with them. But anyway, he told me then he was going to go around Porter Mountain and would meet us over there at the bunch ground in Dead Mare Park. And we did. And we got the work all done, and I see Claude over there talking to Walt. That's whether they begging off. We didn't think we would have to go down to that Willow Creek pasture with those cattle. I had plenty of help anyway, but anyway, Claude had lost his spur when he come around that trail, and he wanted to go back that way and see if he could pick up that spur. And if he didn't need me, he'd take me back around that way. And we just got back out of Dead Mare Park because that fence wasn't there then, on that main trail. Got back in the Quakers a little ways, and he stopped and told me to get off my horse and turn that log over. And there's an old rotten log about so wide. There his spur was. We got on around the mountain a little ways farther, and there was a 2-point buck hanging in the trees. He didn't want to go in down the road into camp and then have to come back around and pack that buck out. So we packed the buck out that day. Just little old things like that I can remember, you know. It really didn't amount to much, I guess. It didn't incriminate him more than a lot of other people done.
Yeah.
But he was pretty sly about it.
Were there any elk in the country then?
Very few. That was the first elk I ever saw that I told him then I had never seen an elk. Well, he says, we'll see if we can show you one of these days. And took him around there, kind of up back of our old pasture, and a little more towards the Hill side, that bunch of spruce in there. Mm-hmm. And there were, I think, 5 head of elk which spooked out. I didn't get a very good look at them then, but that was the first time I ever saw an elk. Mm-hmm. And I was 20 years old then.
Were any wolves up here then, were there at all?
No. There was a guy that worked for couriers that was a trapper. He just worked up here part-time. I can't think of his name now. But he trapped wolves down in that Book Cliff country. And they said that he got the last wolf that was in that Book Cliff country. Mm-hmm. And then said he was a kind of an undercover man for the game and fish then at that time too. And I said something to Claude about he come up there sometime, would stay a night with us when he was working for couriers. I said something about it, you know, whether they need to trust that guy or not. Oh, Claude says, don't worry about him. Say, if he's coming, you can hear him talking before he even gets to the bridge. And Claude had those Quakers. They weren't too big then, but from those windows in his cabins, he just cut those out so you had an alleyway you could see right out to the road. So if there was somebody coming in, you could see who it was.
Mm-hmm. Did he have a barking dog out front?
Huh?
Did he have a barking dog out front?
No, he didn't have it. He had a good dog or two, but they didn't bark.
Mm-hmm. How many summers did you ride for him?
Oh, about 3, I think.
Yeah.
It was just in the fall for a month or 6 weeks or so. Of course, he took care of Ivan Camel's cattle. Ivan had the place at Hiddle's got. And we'd cut ours. With Dad only had a permit for 20 or 30 head. We'd cut them in those pastures. And Roach would cut into Ivan Camel's pasture and ours too, and then sort them out later. The main thing I can remember of that was one day we had them out in the Griffith Corner, going to start to work the beef off there, and a snowstorm hit. Man, it just snowed. One of those old wet snows. And I knew old Claude, he wanted me to get all their cattle they could so they could move them out. And of course, Dad was real crappy about getting his, and we were cutting them in that corner gate of Hiddles down there. And Walt, he threw his hands up, got to quit snowing so hard you can't see the brands, was going to let them go. And I asked Walt if where they're so close to that corner, says, can't we get a few of these in that corner while we got them right here? Hold it, boys, he said, Johnny knows some by heart. So we got some of them in then.
Mhm.
But you couldn't read a brand, but I knew the earmarks, stuff good enough, and I got quite a few of them.
Mhm. Now, when you sorted that beef out in the fall, did you take them clear to the back then pretty quick and ship them, or?
Well, it depends on who it was. Now, those guys like Castle and Couriers and them, they'd go pretty quick with them, take them down Divide Creek and load over to Rifle or Silt or somewhere over there.
Uh-huh.
Because they had the idea if you brought them down here on this green feed, they'd lose a lot of weight.
Mhm.
But of course, everybody down this spot had to come home because only had small bunches. And you had to get to the neighbors to get enough to have a carload and drive them over to the back.
Yeah.
Seems like it's been almost easier to go over Silt Cutoff and take them down Silt from there. Put them on the
Well,
rail yard there.
Well, that's what they done.
Oh, it is.
The Castle and
Okay.
some and Couriers used to take quite a lot of them that way. Yeah, they had a shorter way to going down. I never been there than going down the road. West of there is what they call that Knuckles Divide.
Mhm.
There was a fellow named Marshall Knuckles that was quite a trail man that come from Utah for those big outfits. And he drove through there early, and the reason they called that the Knuckles Divide.
Well, do you know about when they started grazing that Buzzard Creek area? About what year that was?
I don't know. Dad said when he was a kid, well, he was just 21 when he left here, and he had a friend about his same age, John Cook, that had a place out on Kimmel Creek. So his dad used to go with his daughter, and this John Cook's sister. And I don't know, something happened. I always, near it I could tell from the grapevine, that's the reason Dad left the country. He was disappointed in love, and I don't know whether she just quit him or what happened, but anyway, then this John Cook got killed soon after. Well, before Dad left the country, he was driving a team hauling hay, just hauling loose hay, and he had the hay unloaded and was going out across the field, and something spooked that team and they run away with him out across that field, and they had this frame on the front of the wagon and all like that, and that wagon jumped up and hit him in the throat and killed him instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all in all, probably that's the reason Dad was just discouraged with the country and decided he better start a new life somewhere else. But anyway, he and this John Cook went up to Owens Creek with their tent or canvas, or I think they just lived like Indians, run around together all the time. But anyway, they went up to Owens Creek. They said there wasn't a cow in that country yet. There hadn't been.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad left here in 1902.
Mm-hmm.
So it had to have been a year or two before that, probably, before they started. Set the cattle all up here around, they had the peninsula and up through Buzzard, up Road Gulch.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't go on into, clear up into Owens Creek.
Well, where do you think, or when or where do you think all this range etiquette started? Do you think it was something that came from somewhere else, or do you think it's kind of developed locally? Or?
Oh, it come from Charlie Goodnight.
Yeah.
That's the way it was.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that then?
No, I didn't know it then, but I was just glad that old Claude set me straight on it anyway. It said when Edwin Gunnarsson got back from the service, he went up there as important as could be and rode in a brunch, and Harv Branson was the range boss then, and boy, he threw him out right now. Boy, Gunnarsons, they just despised Harv Branson ever since.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't dare discipline one of those Gunnarsson children. But Harv, he didn't care. He was the boss. People backed him up on it. Lee Armour was another guy who was real strong on that you didn't go in a bunch till. But of course, that was about to change things. From then on, we had more corrals and cutting lanes. That wasn't so necessary then. But back in those days, you just imagine at Owens Creek Flat, not a pen to put anything into. Cutting Clyde Creek cattle one way, and muddy cattle another way, and our own beef still another way.
Mm-hmm.
You just couldn't get help enough to hold them and keep them apart.
Mm-hmm.
So if you didn't have some regulation, everybody's cutting. Nobody out there got too many chiefs and no Indians.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see why it was that way, and I suppose that's the way it was before they had fences and corrals. And I think that was just their code of the range then.
When did they start fencing that? About the same time you took the cut?
Yeah, it was after that, because when it started fencing, I was president of the pool.
Well, you were.
You know, so it was pretty late.
Mm-hmm.
See, they took that 50% cut and it still wasn't getting the results that we thought it should.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when they come in with this rest rotation and
Mm-hmm.
the fences. And it was a good thing too, regardless of what those old cowmen thought about it. You got to give that grass a chance. Can't just graze it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
In that old Owens Creek Flat, there'd be 500 to 1,000 head of cows on that every day, all summer, if you didn't have a rider running them out or get them fenced out. It's just a natural place for them.
Mm-hmm.
Come down there where it's flat and open.
Dusty.
They said that Walt Castle bought an outfit over there on Pinyon Mesa on the other side of the Gunnison River. You had to cross that swinging bridge up there around Escalante or wherever it was. And there was a fellow named Crafts Black, that had a permit on that side where Walt bought this outfit. And Kraft was the range boss, and that it wasn't so many years ago either. Well, it was, it was quite a while ago, but anyway, he said to Walt, he drove in the bunch over there and said, oh, Kraft threw him out just that quick.
Mm-hmm.
He says, you've got 3 weeks' work to do down home, and I want to see to it that you do it. So they were still under that range law anyway over there. But when our kids were in 4-H and little young kids, and Crafts had a son and a daughter, I think, is both in 4-H about that time. So he was a guy probably as old as me, or well, he's older. He's been dead for several years now. Usually later on in the fall, Claude would just make arrangements for me to move up to the oil well camp, because there'd just be maybe 2 of George McKelvey's men up there, and the three of us could stay there. And they had that natural gas in that cabin, and you could put a roast on or that and turn it on in the morning, get back to camp that night. You had your meat cooked.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good camp.
You say oil well camp? Is that the upper cow camp?
Yeah, I don't suppose you've ever seen it.
That's
You know
right.
where the mouth of Bird Creek is?
I don't think so.
Well, it'd be across the creek back east from about the mouth of Bird Creek.
Cammy and I were up there 2 springs ago, and that gas is still coming out.
Still coming.
Yeah, it was wet enough there that there was water over that flat,
Yeah.
and where that old pipe comes up out of the ground, it was bubbling up through the water there.
Yeah.
That day we were there.
I haven't been back there to where that camp was since I rode up there.
What happened? Did it burn?
No. See, when Dewey and Arell he took that. See, we had 500 head of cows on the muddy, and that was about right for Dewey's permit. And Dewey, he didn't want to ride with us squash bellies there on Buzzard. Anyway, he was a cowboy,
Mm-hmm.
all the fancy things, and so they let him have that camp
Mm-hmm.
temporarily. But then, I don't know, those rules come in, they made a policy to burn all those old buildings down, and I guess that's what they done with that.
Mm-hmm.
That was about the time Dewey bought the Bell Ranch,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't have to have it anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was a mutual agreement that they done it that way or what had happened.
Always thought it was too bad where they have the gas coming out of the ground anyway. That
Yeah.
they didn't put that Owens or that Crane Creek camp up there.
You know,
Crane Creek, that's what it is. I couldn't remember the name of it.
but they said there's only one thing wrong with it. It didn't happen when we were there, but was that wet gas would freeze off once in a while. You'd have chopped wood.
And thaw out your gas.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of a dangerous proposition.
Yeah.
How'd they dig that well? Was it a hand dug well to get that natural gas?
I don't know. It seemed like there's another one of those places like that down on Gas Creek,
Mhm.
back from the Owens Creek flat. I've never been to that.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out of the ground there just like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they say that it's drier. It isn't as wet gas as that one was up at the oil well.
Mm-hmm.
Was there much sign of Indians up there at all? Or traces of their existence when you were riding?
I just don't remember anything to do
Remember-
with the Indian
Remember,
artifacts or any of that thing. I don't know whether the Indians summered in that country so much. I don't know. I think this battlement side was where the Indians really liked it, and then of course there's part of the Leon country was.
you remember any of the old timers talking about Indians being in this country, or
No, you see, they moved the Indians out before
1881, I guess.
the white man moved in.
Yeah.
They said part of their forest was still burning when Hawksers and Dunlap came over from up LaRue Creek and down Leon Creek to get to where the Vega is now.
Mm-hmm.
There were some of those trees still burning in that fall, the fall of '81.
You know, I read a book here recently on all the burning that took place out here, and this historian seems to think it was more white people burning those forests than Indians, trying to drive them out, trying to drive the Indians out, not the other way around.
No, I think when they told the Indians they were taking them out to Utah, Ute Indians. They had a deadline when they were going to move them. That's when they set fire to it.
Hmm.
It must have been a pretty dry fall to get it burned as good as it did.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Even though over there, above Gary's ranch, up there on the clear up in the rocks, almost to the face of the Ragged Mountains, there's a lot of those big old burned out stumps up there too that they must have gotten into, and because they're old trees.
Yeah. About all those old cabins up there around the lower flats and there were made out of those fire-killed logs.
Mm-hmm. When was that cabin built? Do you know?
Well, it would have had to been before 1916
Mm-hmm.
because we still had the mineral rights for that, and the government withheld the mineral rights and all that homesteaded land that was homesteaded after 1916.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been along in that area at the time sometime, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Was there burned timber up above on Porter Mountain? Is that where they got those logs?
Yeah. Wasn't a lot, but there was some up in there around that Burt Park. There used to be some of those dead trees there. But I think most of them, though, they got them up on Crane Creek, that burn up.
Yeah. Up high.
That's where Roach got those for those cabins that he had there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that old double X cabin where the Crane Creek camp is now, they got those logs back in there. I think they just burned that old cabin down or used a lot of those logs to build a present camp that's there.
Mm-hmm.
There's that old Myers cabin up there, Leon. I guess they burned that down.
Yeah.
Did you know him or know of him?
Oh, yeah, I know old Jim Mars.
Did you? Okay. I wasn't sure what time he was around.
Yeah. And he had a nephew that worked in California, and he'd come out here every year and go hunting. I used to hunt with him and Lewis up there when we were riding, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, when was Jim Myers? When did he run his trap line? I mean, was
Oh, probably in the late 30s, clear along until up in the maybe 50s, something like that, as long as he's able to.
Mm-hmm.
Did he have a string of cabins out through there somewhere?
Well, he stayed with Carl Henderson, the place that Bob McKelvey had. And I don't know who's got it now, some of those doctors, I think.
Yeah, up
Right
there
next
to Clifford's.
Right next to Clifford's camp. That was kind of main headquarters. And then he'd snowshoe from there to Kenny Creek, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then from Kenny Creek to the Myers cabin. And I don't know whether he come back or whether he made some other route.
Did he have a camp in Kenny Creek, a cabin or something?
Yeah,
there?
there was a cabin there, but I think it pretty much belonged to the old Kendall place in the Meadows
Mm-hmm.
that Dewey and Rell had where the dam is now.
Mm-hmm.
But they were going to build that reservoir. And they had that cabin there then, and I think old Jim kind of worked in with them on that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there was one year that they said he took an old scythe, cut enough of that hay in that tall grass, and stored it in that barn and left a horse there all winter.
There in Kenny Creek?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just let him eat snow.
I suppose, I don't know whether, I just don't know. I heard he must have watered it every 2 or 3 days anyway when he'd come through
Mm-hmm.
on his snowshoes.
Oh,
Now, did he just pretty much trap marten?
Weasel, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
There was some marten, but weasel was a thing that everybody trapped then.
Mm-hmm.
The amazing thing about it, there was lots of weasel then, There are pretty few anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You ride that snow country up there now, you don't see very many weasel tracks. Well, there used to be weasel tracks everywhere.
Huh.
They were better off when they were being hunted, I think. They
That's-
claim those old male weasels will kill all the young ones.
Mm-hmm. I suppose they live on the squirrels, don't they?
Well, they dig down into those gophers.
Oh, uh-huh.
They seemed dig in and maybe they'd come back up through under the snow way off 20, 30 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
Like they go into those gopher burrows and mice too, I suppose, in there. But
Probably took a lot of weasel hides to make it worth your while, didn't it? He probably had a pretty damn good trapper.
But I guess they was worth quite a lot of money then,
Yeah.
before they got all this humane things about furs.
Well, what eventually put him out of business or made him quit?
Oh, part of the old age, I think. It wasn't just him. There were several other guys that run those trap lines up there. There was those Surrey brothers that lived down here in Collbran. One of them worked for the Collbran Supply part of the time, and he was the only guy that could run the only concrete mixer we had in Platte Valley. He was a cruddy-looking old guy. But they only had one concrete mixer back then, and that belonged to the Collbran Supply,
Mm-hmm.
and that old Clint Surrey run it. And the other one, I don't know, he just trapped in the wintertime. Old Clarence was his name, Clarence Surrey.
Mm-hmm.
And Poke Roach used to have a trap line up there quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And they trapped a lot of coyotes
Oh,
back
must have been a tough way to make a living.
then. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what was Jim Myers like? Is he kind of a mountain man type or just...
Yeah, he's a pretty quiet old guy. He used to stay up there when Bob McKelvey owned that place next to Clifford's.
Mm-hmm.
Stay up there and feed Bob's cattle in the early part of the winter. I don't know whether he done much trapping by then or not.
Mm-hmm.
He had this nephew, and his last name was Hutchinson. I don't remember his first name now, but he'd come here every fall, maybe stay a month with old Jim.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim owned the place that Pudge Cox has got down there now. That's where he wintered. He had all of that where Pudge has got that. I guess Pudge sold that other cabin, didn't he?
Yeah, that
Say,
red cabin.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, old Jim owned that land in there.
Mm-hmm.
And when he died, he left it. He willed it to this Hutchison.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Hutchison peddled it out.
Yeah.
Never heard tell of him anymore since then. Main thing I can remember of old Hutch, I would call him Hutch. He's talking about having to set the alarm to get up in the morning up there and all that to get away riding. And he was telling how when he went to work for some big corporation out there, which he was still working for at that time, but he said they put him through a school that when the alarm went off, get up now,
Mm-hmm.
hang your feet over the bed. He said, don't lay there after the alarm goes off. He said, there's more men lost their jobs because they were late to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember him telling that.
Yeah. Now, did that Jim Myers stay up there all winter?
Not usually.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how he did when he was doing all the trapping so much, but he always come down and spent part of his winter down here anyway.
Mm-hmm.
What did he hunt everything that he ate, or trap everything that he ate, or how did he feed himself?
Well, I think he kept supplies when he worked out of, when Carl Henderson lived there, he kind of lived with them part of the time.
Well, I know his cabin wasn't any bigger than
Oh, it was just
This
a
area right here.
little bitty thing.
Yeah.
But it was big enough for, I suppose he stored some supplies there in the late fall before the snow got deep.
You ready to go to sleep?
About.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's an hour.
Already, huh?
Yeah.